Good evening. This is Defacto Review, a weekly analysis of Mongolia's latest political, economic, and social issues by economist and columnist Mr. Khural, who's joining us today from Paris, France. How's your trip going? Good evening.
Doing good, very well, thank you.
Now, what is the purpose of this trip?
We are meeting here several corporations to more understand what are the business conditions enduring for them to invest in Mongolia more.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of our issues actually deals with that subject, but before that, we're going to be discussing the following three topics for this week's Defacto Review. Topic number one is the Prime Minister's visit to Germany last week, the Speaker or the Chairman of the Great State Khulal's visit to Turkey, and the return of the Peace Corps in Mongolia. Last week, the Prime Minister of Mongolia, Mr. Oyun-Irten, visited Germany and held talks with the Chancellor of the Federal Republic of Germany, Mr. Olaf Scholz. And during these official talks, the Prime Minister asked the Chancellor to intensify cooperation between the two countries in the energy sector within the framework of Mongolia's Vision 2050 plan and the New Revival policy. They also discussed involving and partnering with Mongolia in the implementation of infrastructure and investment projects discussed during the G7 summit, and to cooperate with Mongolia on large-scale construction projects, including the Tauntla power plant and the 5th thermal power plant. They agreed to implement a program that sends 1,000 engineers to Germany to be trained. And Chancellor Scholz acknowledged that cooperation with democracies like Mongolia is of strategic importance to Germany, as they are keen to reduce dependence on single states, especially regarding natural resources. So, Mr. Khural, lately the world has been moving towards this new world where we're shifting to electric vehicles, and a lot of countries are mining and exploring these new types of rare minerals. So I'd like to ask how, since this was a part of the talks in Germany, how big are our reserves in these matters, and how can we benefit from these?
Well, on this rare earth mineral, there was indeed a conversation about supplying from Mongolia these elements to the developed nations, in particular to Germany. According to the U.S. government geologists' survey in 2009, Mongolia has some 16.5% equal of these minerals, which makes Mongolia the second after China, because China is supplying 95% of this mineral to the world market. Mm-hmm. And there is a good potential for Mongolia. There is, for example, a deposit called Halzang Burgite, which has 42 million tons reserve, of which they may produce 446 tons of this pure mineral content, mm-hmm. which is very important for electric vehicles, as you said. But I would like to see the visit a bit with a wider angle, as it was a very important trip for Mongolia. It's our Prime Minister official visit after almost more than 10 years to Germany, and this Prime Minister has a vision called 2050 Mongolia, mm-hmm. and under this vision, he has been doing for shorter term new recovery policy, his government, and the Prime Minister had talked to German partner about large-scale construction projects, mostly infrastructure projects, including Tauntla power plant and 5th thermal power plant projects. As we said, construction project of the semi-processing plant of rare earth elements, which are the main raw materials for copper processing plants and electric vehicle equipments. So it was agreed to create a joint research work in this field. Another thing is about 1,000 Mongolian engineers to be trained in Germany in the very critical sectors like energy, transport, logistics, mining, information technology, urban planning, agriculture, and forestry. So these are just two main objects they have been discussing, along with many other things, including, for example, establishing passenger and freight transportation agreement, for example, and to have a near future set up a joint working group with a German Ministry of Digital and Transport, Digital Development and Transport. And they were also subject of talking about food security, developing national value-added products, supporting export-oriented enterprises, and improving access to financing. So these are the very wide range dialogue that two governments have discussed, and out of which I would like particularly highlight the 1,000 engineer projects. We have done the similar project with Japan. Now, by this time, almost 1,000 engineers are made, but many of them are remaining working in Japan. So probably that would be the case with Germany. However, this amount of Mongolians will be more knowledgeable about German industry, and hopefully one day they come back and to develop that businesses in Mongolia. But one thing is to make this kind of trainings and also preparations in a country like Germany. But the other thing is to create such a conditions, infrastructure, where these people can implement their knowledge, learn in countries like Germany or Japan.
So my next question is about the power plants, the proposed Tauentla power plants and the fifth thermal power plant. So how will Germany be cooperating on these projects? Will they be mostly doing financing?
Well, the financing of the coal-based power station is not easy. Technology-wise, they have one of the best technologies, but it is not that easy within the program of sustainable development for cutting CO2 emissions. So it is not going to be easy, but most probably it is a matter of more efficient technology that Mongolia will try to implement from Germany. Prime Minister Oyun Iltin was given an interview to Deutsche Welle, in which the German journalist asked about Mongolia abstaining from the vote against the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And the Prime Minister had explained what was the motive behind the abstaining by Mongolia about all this abstaining. And the main reason is, basically he said that the war is not solution. But however, behind that, Mongolia is 100% dependent on our gas and food from Russia. So we cannot afford having everything cut one day, so that we cannot provide any minimum medical services to our people. That was the main topic of this interview.
Yesterday, the UN General Assembly condemned the illegal annexations of territories in Ukraine by Russia, but Mongolia abstained, as it did in March when the UN General Assembly condemned Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Why did Mongolia abstain?
From the very beginning, Mongolia has held the position and policy that countries should resolve their issues in a peaceful way, by diplomatic means, with minimal damage to each other. It is clear that Mongolia stands against war and for peace. Our point of view is that it is better to approach the issue peacefully without dragging this war on. Because as the war drags on, every country in the world will pay and suffer. Especially in developing countries, the damage will be even greater. Civilians will suffer more. That is why Mongolia continues to express its position that the UN, the Security Council members and the G7 should resolve the issue through peaceful negotiations. That remains our position.
Let's move on to our second topic, which was also an official visit by an official. Mr. Zanishter, the chairman of the state Great Khural, visited the Republic of Turkey at the invitation of the Speaker of the Grand National Assembly of Turkey, Mr. Mustafa Sento. As a part of his official visit, the chairman paid a courtesy visit to the President of the Republic of Turkey, Mr. Erdogan, and during the meeting, the two sides mutually reaffirmed their commitments to advance bilateral relations to a new level and exchanged views on deepening cooperation in the spheres of trade, economy, defense, culture, tourism, and education. During his talks with his counterpart, the speaker, the Turkish speaker expressed satisfaction with the fact that the development of relations and cooperations between our two countries is being intensified, and a high-level visit is also being planned in the near future. He then emphasized that Mongolia declared Turkey as its third neighbor in 2011, while expressing willingness to bring Mongolia-Turkey relations to the level of strategic partnership. He then expressed willingness to expand cooperation in the protection and conservation of cultural monuments and heritages, and to develop tourism based on archaeological discoveries. So lots to unpack here. He visited many officials during his visit, and he even got an honorary doctorate from the Izmir Khatib Celebi University, and he was the first foreigner to receive the honor. So what were your takeaways from this trip by the speaker?
There are many similar high-level visits in between two countries happening, though during the COVID it had a break. Mm-hmm. Now it's first the highest level official visit. And I would like to highlight out of all this trip a particular talk or expressed their request to increase flight frequency and to stop the seats, the passenger numbers limit on flights of Turkish Airlines in between two cities, Istanbul and Ulaanbaatar. Indeed, now there are 2 days or so a week, 2 flights go Nihat, Mongolian Airlines, and Turkish Airlines in between Ulaanbaatar and Istanbul. And yet all flights are full. Seats are hard to find. So in that situation, there is a need to increase, of course, the flight restrictions, the number of restrictions to stop that restrictions. However, Mongolian Airlines is always was very cautious about Turkish Airlines, as it may create such a conditions for competition that all passengers may go to the Turkish Airlines, which is quite fair. And that's why Mongolia recently started to talk about the open sky agreement with other countries. In fact, there is a huge tourism potential between two countries. The Turkish people regard Mongolia as their ancestors' place. In fact, there are many monuments which proves that. And recently, in last summer even, Mongolian and the Turkish archaeologists found very much artifacts of historic archaeological values related to several khans in Mongolia, in Turkey. And there is a particular place in Mongolia in Ogurhanga Aymak where the Turks see, we found the monument to Turkish ancestors and with even their old sign of the Turkish language. And many Turks would be coming to Mongolia, in particular summertime, provided that we have right conditions, right conditions of hotel accommodation, etc. In Mongolia, then there is really so many thousands, if not several hundred thousands tourists from Turkey can visit Mongolia. So we have been talking about that for the last almost 25 years. And hopefully after this trip, there will be a good door opened for Turkish tourists to Mongolia.
Besides these things that you've mentioned, what other fields do you think that both countries would benefit from by partnering in them? What other issues do you think that we could tackle together?
It's not only tourism but also construction businesses, where trades as well. Due to closure of Chinese border at the port at the checkpoint Iran. Mongolians have been replacing Iran with goods from Turkey. It was exchange rate favorable for Mongolian tourists. And the many goods we could replace Iran, a city in China. So it shows really that many goods we can get from Turkey. It's good news. Secondly, construction, as I said, construction materials, know-hows, designs, many buildings made by Turkish constructors, for example, in Istanbul, in Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan. So I see, after my many visits to Turkey, a lot of opportunities as soon as there are frequent flights and more enduring conditions for Turkish investment to Mongolia. So that's the whole range of things we should do first. So then the other things, which we already do in terms of culture, academic research, studies, we have been doing already a lot of good jobs. So I think there is a great perspective in cooperation between two countries, businesses, scientists, academicians, and even NGOs.
Well, let's hope that the relationship of Mongolia to these two countries that we mentioned, Germany and Turkey, continues to blossom. And the third topic deals with our relationship with our closest third neighbor, the United States. So after more than a two-year hiatus of the COVID-19 pandemic, 27 Peace Corps trainees arrived in Mongolia this week. And of these 27, 2 of them were former Peace Corps volunteers who had to evacuate when the pandemic started in Mongolia. And they expressed how happy they were to be back. The new volunteers, however, will complete 14 weeks of pre-service training, and then subsequently will be sworn in as Peace Corps volunteers. And upon their completion of this training, these trainees will become English education and community development volunteers all over Mongolia. So what roles do these volunteers play within the relationship between our two countries?
Well, this Peace Corps, first, we are very happy to have them back. And 27 new Peace Corps volunteers coming to the country, as you said. And they usually work in their programs usually focus on languages, technical and cross-cultural competencies necessary for successful Peace Corps services. And by now, we have some 1,500 U.S. Peace Corps volunteers in Mongolia served. And this initiative started by J. Kennedy in the 60s to introduce to young Americans about the other countries And I think this program is very successful, very good example of making closer young people. And the U.S., these 1,500 Peace Corps volunteers made a lot contribution towards friendship of two peoples, and also made a big contribution towards collaboration in universities, colleges, vocational schools. And so Mongolians in general are very happy. Also, they are not only making substantial contribution towards increasing knowledge of ordinary Mongolians of English, and also the American culture. And on their side, they learn truly about the nomads' value of lives, even more than the Mongolian children grown up in big cities. And with that, I think very minimal approach, very ecological, caring approach, etc. This kind of skills or thinking in terms of environmental safe place, I think it's also good contribution of them for them to understand, to accept this culture. Many Peace Corps volunteers follow careers that leads to further development of bilateral relations between two countries. They become diplomats, officers, even NGO officers, and contributing towards more social and economic cooperation of two countries. There are a lot of successful cases which prove that. And we Mongolians very much welcome these young volunteers to Mongolia. I believe it's a very right movement for understanding better on two sides and developing better, more friendly relations between two peoples.
If you were to give any advice for our culture to these new volunteers, what advice and maybe what insights would you give them?
Well, being in the U.S. and understanding that to some extent their culture, I think there are a lot of things to learn also for them from Mongolian nomads, being minimalistic, as I said, and also having a particular respectful attitude to ecology, to nature, and I think deeper understanding our history will be also a good addition to better knowledge by them about Mongolia.
That is all for this week. This has been Defacto Review, a weekly analysis of Mongolia's latest political, economic, and social issues by economist and columnist Mr. Jaral Sahin.
Thank you very much for watching us. We try to share with you our analysis about the most important three events of last week in Mongolia. Thank you.